Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. My name is Apostate Aladdin, and as always, joined by my cat, Apu, just a little bit off camera. Say hello. Okay, he doesn't really want to say hello. And the point of today's live stream, the purpose of today's live stream is to go through a piece of Islamic apologetics and dissect it. By that, I mean I would go through the words that have been said, the manner in which they were said, and what hasn't been said. And hopefully that'll give you a window into my thoughts about the topic and specifically about what the speaker is talking about. And I do my best to be fair in these analyses. And of course, I come with my own biases. So if you do notice something and you feel like you disagree or you have different thoughts, please feel free to voice them in the live chat and in the comments afterwards. If you do voice them in the live chat, maybe I'll be able to highlight them on the stream if I do see them. So there's that. So in today's live stream, I'll be watching a portion of a video titled Top 10, Top 10 Most Common Yet Controversial Questions, where Imam Ibrahim Bakeer is the one asking Sheikh Yasir Qadhi some questions about Islam. And this video is, as you can see, over an hour long, but worry not, I'm not going to make you sit through all of that with me today. Maybe I'll segment it over one video a week. I don't know, haven't decided yet. But one topic caught my attention today, and it's the topic of free will and predestination and determinism and related matters. I'll try to define any terms that come up as they come up, if I can remember their definitions, and clarify Arabic words as they speak them, because they do mention a lot of Arabic words and some people might get lost a little bit, but worry not, I will try to explain what they're saying. And like I said, I'll try to interact with the comments, so feel free to point anything out. So I'll be playing this at 1.1 speed just to shorten things up a little bit. And I'll play part of the introduction, then I'll skip to the question of today's question, which has to do with free will. So without further ado, let's begin by playing the video.
This is Imam Bakeer, Imam of IC in EV. Today, I am so excited and happy and delighted to meet with Professor Yasir Qadhi in his masjid, Epic Masjid, to ask him some questions. I call it like spicy questions and critical questions, and everyone is wondering about the answers, and even Dr. Yasir answered about many of these questions, but today I want to clearly to listen to the views of Dr. Yasir Qadhi.
ومن أحسن قولا
I'll just skip this part.
Every time you come to my city and you want to, mashallah, interview me, interrogate me, walhamdulillah, fabiha wa ni'ma. I appreciate these, and I hope, inshallah, there is fa'idah and benefit in these types of conversations, inshallah.
Well, Shaykhna, last interview, a lot of people, they, alhamdulillah, got benefited from your views, and many people, they knew you more, and they even start following your videos because it was clear for them your answers that time. I'm so happy for that.
Alhamdulillah. But just to be clear, this is something you want to be done, and these questions are very hassas, but no problem, inshallah. Whatever you guys.
Hassas means sensitive. And the first little bit of analysis here, maybe I'm looking into this, reading into this too much, but it seems like Yasir Qadhi is trying to distance himself from this conversation as much as possible. But he's like, you know what? If you insist on me having this conversation with you, I will. But that's just me being nitpicky. Let's get back to the video.
You guys want, alhamdulillah.
We have 10 questions today, 5 questions, aqadi questions or aqidah matters, inshallah, and 5 questions with the fiqhi issues and matters, bi'idhnillah ta'ala.
So for a little bit of an explanation, aqidah, it comes from the Arabic word language. So it means creeds. And in the context of Islam, there are groups of believers who have different creeds, and these will be opinions about their interpretation of core matters of faith. That's the way that I understood it. Fiqh is more to do with sharia and applying Islamic practices and laws. So there sometimes is a distinction between what are the core tenets or core beliefs that people shouldn't be disagreeing on or should come to some agreement on, and what is there in terms of fiqh that people can maybe find some wiggle room and see what their interpretation of it is. That's just the simplistic breakdown of what they just said. But I'll skip ahead to the, let's see if they have anything else to say before I skip to the section.
Let me start with the first question with Dr. Yasir, something about Aqidah.
Okay, let's move on because I'm not addressing that question today. It's an interesting one, but we'll get to the second question.
Has divided the ummah.
Yes. طيب شيخنا, question number 2, actually one from the most difficult questions, not for Muslims only, for even those who do not believe in Allah. They think about this question, that السؤال القدري والجبري, القدرية والجبرية. Do people have free will, or just people have, let us say, يعني جبرية, that they are مجبورين to make something?
So to clarify, he's talking about al-qadriya wa jabriya. Qadar means predetermined, basically. It means God's will for what will happen. Jabriya, or it means it's not compatibilism, it's determinism. So do people have free will, or are they is our free will deterministic? I think that's the topic that they want to talk about. But I just want to highlight for a second that he mentioned something about non-believers. I want you to hear this.
Free will, or about this question, that السؤال القدري والجبري, from the most difficult questions, not for Muslims only, for even those who do not believe in Allah. They think about this question, that السؤال القدري والجبري, القدرية والجبرية.
Okay, so I agree with him there. The question of, do we have free will, or is everything predetermined in some way, or is everything deterministic? That is a question that a lot of people struggle with, and by struggle with, I mean might not have a clear answer to, and I myself don't have a clear answer to that. I'll tell you my opinion on it at the end. But I want to clarify, the question that most people have about this, not most non-Muslims, isn't how could there be a God that is compatible with free will? These are different questions, and they'll delve into the second question as well. So I want you to be very cognizant of that. The question that many people think of is, do we have free will or not? Not how could God exist and we have free will at the same time, or God does exist, so how can we have free will? Those are different questions. So let's get back to the video.
والجبرية. People have, let us say, يعني جبرية, that they are مجبورين to make something.
So again, Shaykh, mashallah, your questions.
Majburin means forced. So it's predetermined and it's deterministic, and people are forced to act a certain way.
Are very amiq, very deep, very philosophical, and we are in a quick Q&A round, and it is very difficult to give justice to this answer. And in fact, I have not even given a very long topic in this, because
do you believe in determinism, or do you believe in free will?
So this simplistic notion, aslan, itself is mistaken. The simplistic notion of either this or that. Shaykh al-Kareem, in my humble opinion, the issue of qadr and predestination and the ilm of Allah and the mashia of Allah and the irada of Allah, this issue is something that our limited minds will never be able to fully comprehend.
Who saw that one coming? So I just want to highlight something here. He's just jumbled a bunch of different issues into one. So it's not just do we have free will or not, but well, how much does God know? How could God know everything and not affect free will? That's not one issue or one question. I just want to make that clear. I'm being a little nitpicky, I know, but I want to be clear about that.
Our finite minds can never understand the infinity of Allah's qudra and khalq and power. And it is a mistake to assume that we will be able to understand. Who exactly are we to imagine that our aql is going to understand the qudra and the ilm of Allah Azza wa Jal? So the less we think about this, and in fact in our Sunni tradition there's a very interesting hadith in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, that the only time, according to our Sunni tradition, the Sahaba had an ikhtilaf over aqidah in the time of the Prophet was over this issue of qadr. In Sunan al-Tirmidhi, it is narrated that some of the Sahaba began speaking, that the Quran seems to suggest a type of free will. And others said, but the Quran seems to also suggest that, there is no free will. And according to the hadith, the Prophet came out, muhmar al-wajh, his face was angry and red. And he goes, Abi hada umirtum, did I command you to do this? To try to...
So this hadith is interesting. I didn't have time to pull it up, but let's hear this hadith and I'll give you my thoughts.
Find the Qur'ans fighting each other, or not fighting each other, but using verses of the Quran against each other, right?
Yeah, so this is interesting, the way that he cites that hadith. The Prophet was angry that people were, here, this comment also talks about that. The Prophet was angry that Muslims, believers, were arguing against themselves, using the Quran as hujjah, as dalil, as evidence to make their point. Is there free will? Is there not free will? Muslims were doing that, which is a good thing. Like there are a lot of religions that are specifically built on this kind of arguing among themselves and finding the answer and using the holy text as evidence. But the Prophet was angry at that, according to this hadith that Yasir Qadhi is citing. His face was red and he was angry, and he said, "Is this what you were commanded to do?" And Yasir Qadhi corrected himself. He said people were fighting each other, which I don't know if the hadith says they were fighting or debating, but I guess these two ideas are so close in his mind that if people are debating a matter, then they're fighting, and that's bad. But he was saying that how could you use the verses against each other? But it's not that personal. It's not about using them against each other or fighting each other. It's, I have an understanding of religion. This is the verse that I'm citing. And Muhammad isn't here to, like, at the time, I guess Muhammad was there to clarify things, but instead of clarifying things, he blamed them for arguing against each other using the text that he brought to them from God. I don't think that's a great anecdote to bring up, to be honest. And Yasir Qadhi immediately went to the idea that we are too simple to comprehend God's complexity, and we can't understand how God knows everything or what God knows about everything. But that's not really the question, is it? I'll let the guy asking the questions ask the questions for now.
Right?
But he said also, كل شيء مكتوب على الإنسان شقي أم سعيد.
So
the question here is, just
so,
let me
no,
ask.
Okay, to translate that hadith, كل شيء مكتوب. Wait, let's hear it again.
مكتوب على
using verses of the Quran against each other, right?
But he said also, كل شيء مكتوب على الإنسان شقي أم سعيد.
كل شيء مكتوب على الإنسان شقي أم سعيد. Everything is written about a human, happy or blessed or upset or miserable. I'm not translating the words exactly, but that's the gist of it. Muhammad said that God has written everything about a person's life, whether they're going to be happy or not, what they're going to do, if they're going to be a good person or not. That's a good hadith to bring up, but he didn't translate it.
So the question here is, just let me ask you the question clearly, then I'm going to listen to your
saying
answer.
the question itself is flawed.
لا, not flawed. I'm asking a regular question. Millions of people are asking it. It's regular question.
هل الإنسان مخير أم
لا
مجبور؟
مخير
Then
ومسير.
what?
أنا أسأل.
هل الإنسان مخير أم مسير? Does the person have choice, or sorry, مخير أم مجبر? Does the person have choice, free will, or are they forced?
أسأل سؤال واضح وصريح.
Yes.
Do Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala write?
Okay. This is again me being nitpicky, but I think this is very funny. So the way that this sheikh is, this imam is interrupting Yasir Qadhi, some people might perceive as a little rude, and some people are actually questioning, is he on our side? I'll talk about his motivations in a little bit, his alleged motivations in a little bit. And some people might perceive it as rude, the way that he's asking Yasir Qadhi those questions. I am on the side of supporting, like, the imam could do a better job at asking these questions, but I like that he's holding Yasir Qadhi's feet to the fire. He's trying to bring it back to the point. And I like how this detail right here, Yasir Qadhi, first of all, he's being talked over. He's not able to interject a lot with what he wants to say. And when he does say it, it seems to be almost evading the questioner, saying it's too complex, we don't understand it, I don't have enough time in this Q&A. But the one thing that he could say, that he could bring out a grammatical mistake that he wanted to correct, he brought out immediately because he could.
Question
هل الإنسان مخير أم
لا
مجبور؟
مخير
Then
ومسير.
what?
أنا أسأل سؤال واضح وصريح.
Yes.
Do Allah subhanahu wa
Does
ta'ala,
Allah?
Do Allah? No, it's does Allah. I don't see the relevance, but actually it brings up a good question. Listen.
or did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Yeah, so is it does or did? Is it present tense or past tense? Well, Allah is beyond space and time. So Allah has done this in the past, but also is always doing this. Allah is everywhere all the time. Anyway, getting back to the video.
Right upon us what we're going to do or no?
So again, Sheikh, you want a simplistic answer for a very deep question.
No.
And this is the problem. Allah Azza wa Jal, by virtue of the fact that He is Alimul Ghayb, Alamul Ghuyub.
No.
Alimul Ghayb means knower of the unknown or the unseen, or matters that only God knows, basically.
Must know everything.
What about his willingness?
Sheikh, let me
Go
finish.
ahead, go ahead.
He
I like what the Imam is asking, because we're not asking whether God knows everything or not. That's not the point of contention here.
must know everything.
No.
If he does not know, then a'udhu billah, this is tanqis fi ilm Allah.
No.
And
A'udhu billah, this is tanqis fi ilm Allah. I want to highlight this point as well. So Yasir Qadhi is saying, if we are saying or implying that God doesn't know everything, first of all, a'udhu billah means I take refuge in Allah. Usually people say that when they're scared of something. So it's like he's making a verbal mistake. If we're insinuating that God doesn't know everything, if we're insinuating that God isn't what Allah describes God to be, then astaghfirullah, a'udhu billah, may God protect me from his anger. Like he's already scared that he made a mistake by having this discussion and maybe insinuating the possibility that God doesn't know everything, which is not what the questioning person was saying or the imam was asking him. Let's hear that again.
everything.
No.
If he does not know, then a'udhu billah, this is tanqis fi ilm Allah.
No.
And
This is tanqis fi ilm Allah. This is reduction in God's knowledge. Again, not at all the point that was being talked about here, but let's hear him out.
that's why even the Mu'tazila did not negate Allah's ilm.
No.
Even the Mu'tazila. So
Amen.
no Muslim who prays 5 times a day.
No.
يعني حكي عن بعض الناس يعني بس no
No.
فرقة.
No.
No فرقة. Right? Yes, you had Ibn Sina, but no فرقة.
So he's saying all these schools of thought, all these creeds, they don't disagree on the fact that God knows or must know everything. I use the word fact here very loosely, but on the alleged fact that God knows everything. Again, that's not the question.
Denied Allah's ilm.
Okay.
Okay, جيد. The ikhtilaf comes that does Allah's
the ikhtilaf, the
mashi'ah.
difference. Okay, I want to highlight this comment because it's a good point. Why does he speak in Arabic? That's very confusing. It's not like the words that he wants to say don't exist in English, or using them in Arabic is going to make the point even better. Some of those words, I get it. And he can very easily say both words in Arabic and then in English. Their Arabic is probably even better than mine, and they have spent a lot more time studying these words. They have a better one-to-one ability to pull up the right word specifically in the religious context too. So it's kind of annoying and inconsiderate to listeners who don't speak Arabic, which is most Muslims on earth don't speak Arabic. So it's almost pompous of them to keep using Arabic and ignore the listeners. But maybe they're just thinking about themselves and the conversation. So I won't fault him too much for that. But I'll try to explain the parts that he's not explaining.
Okay,
And
جيد.
also, I have to concede to this, and sometimes it's because it makes them sound holier. I see people, it's almost like virtue signaling in a way. I see people throw in Arabic words, Muslims throw in Arabic words even when they don't speak Arabic. But there's this idea that if you know Arabic, you're closer to Islam, it's more authentic, and you're a better Muslim, which shouldn't be the case if God doesn't discriminate. But that's a whole other topic.
جيد. The ikhtilaf comes that
The difference
does
comes.
Allah's mashi'ah overcome our mashi'ah?
Yeah, this is
This
the main
is
question.
Does God's will overcome our will?
okay. This is another issue.
Forget
Now,
about العلم. Let us go
Now,
to المشيئة
yeah.
والwilling.
So
Yeah, so the other Imam is saying, forget about knowledge. We're not talking about God's knowledge. We're talking about God's will. So finally, Yasir Qadhi is starting to get to the point.
in order to be our time frame, I'm going to answer in a different way. I believe
akhi.
it is not
Yeah, Sheikh, you used up most of the time talking about something that's irrelevant, but sure.
possible for our minds, and I'm going to answer in a different way. I believe it is not possible for our minds and our language to understand this reality. Therefore, what we should do is affirm Allah is all powerful, affirm Allah is all knowledgeable, affirm that nothing happens without His knowledge and Mashi'a and Qudra. We affirm that fi haqqillah, and we live our lives as if we have free will.
Okay, hold up. So he was saying we affirm that nothing happens without God's Mashi'a. He was basically saying God's will, God's ability. Maybe there was another word.
Affirm that nothing happens without His knowledge and Mashi'a and Qudra. We affirm that.
Knowledge and Mashi'a, knowledge and will and ability. Okay, so something I want to highlight in his
Language
answer.
to understand this reality.
He says not even our language, not our minds, not our language could ever understand this reality. Whose idea was it to preach this religion to our minds in this language, if not Allah's? And he says that the point is we have to affirm, say it again.
Therefore, what we should do is affirm Allah is all powerful, affirm Allah is all knowledgeable, affirm that nothing happens without His knowledge and Mashi'a and Qudra. We affirm that fi haqqillah. And we live our lives as if we have free will.
But one
Okay, the second part of that, I have more thoughts about. We live our lives as if we have free will. I sort of agree with that, sort of. But what he was saying, it is contradictory. Our language and our minds can never express it. Therefore, we must affirm that it's all true. Yeah, I mean, a lot of questions here. So what's the point? We can't understand reality, therefore Islam is true. How can we know that? How can we know that what he's saying is true? I don't know, but I'll let him finish. And no, I'm not going to take my mask off, at least not today.
But وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. How to explain this ayah?
So this وَمَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَنْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ. This is a verse. You do not will except that Allah wills, or except what Allah wills. That's a very good point. And people are still wondering, why is the other sheikh, why is this imam putting Yasir Qadhi in such hot fire? Why is he quoting verses and hadiths that actually undermine Yasir Qadhi's point and maybe undermine Islam altogether? I don't think the other sheikh sees it as undermining Islam, but we'll get to that.
So it's very easy to explain in the sense of the Quran, because liman sha'a minkum an yastaqim. Allah affirms a mashi'a.
No.
Allah Azza wa Jalla says you have a mashi'a. Then
Okay.
Allah.
Mashi'a means will. Allah affirms will. Let's hear it again.
So it's very easy to explain in the sense of the Quran, because liman sha'a minkum an yastaqim. Allah affirms a mashi'a.
No.
The verse says for those of you who will to follow the straight path. So God is going to guide you if you will to follow the straight path. God, Allah, affirms your will.
Allah Azza wa Jalla says you have a mashi'a. Then
Okay.
Allah Azza wa Jalla makes it contingent,
No,
but you cannot.
We cannot reach, Shaykhna, if we cannot reach to the ilm of Allah or the qudra of Allah or the mashi'a of Allah, and we cannot even explain it or we cannot imagine it, why He Himself talks about it?
Because it's always done in the context of praising Allah's magnificence and Allah's power. It is never
Okay, two things I want to talk about.
done.
So when he was saying that God affirms your will, so yahdi man yasha, yudillu man yasha, that's another verse that says he that apologists say it means that God guides who He wills, He meaning God wills, and yudillu man yasha, and misleads who He wills. But some apologists say it means no, it's talking about the will of the man himself. So if a man wills guidance, God is going to do it, or God is going to affirm it. If a man wills the opposite of guidance, misguidance, then God's going to do that. So let me ask you this question mathematically. 3 plus x equals 3. What is x? 0. That's effectively what he's describing here. 3 is your will. X is Allah affirming your will. And what happens is you have your will, 3 at the end of the equation. So what he's describing is when you will something, God affirms it. So effectively, God's doing nothing. So if I somehow choose whether I believe or not, or whether I drink some water or not, or whatever it is, the topic, if God, all that God does is confirms what I'm doing and just presses, okay, then do that every time, then God's effect is 0. And maybe God is working in a way that I cannot comprehend, nor understand, nor express in my language. But as the other Imam was asking, if that's all true, let's hear the question again.
Why He Himself talks about it?
Because
Why would God then talk about it? If it's all true that it's happening, but we can't see it, and to us, it actually looks more reasonably as a 0 net effect, that God is doing nothing. So therefore, the simplest explanation is this is not God, or that God doesn't exist, at least not in that way. So why is God talking about it? What does Yasir Qadhi say?
Because it's always done in the context of praising Allah's magnificence and Allah's power. It is never done to tell us, don't do anything because you cannot do anything. Al-aqs, the Quran always tells us, i'malu, wa qul i'malu, right? And Allah tells us to pray, and Allah tells us to fast. The entire Quran is
Then why we
commandments,
have to
okay?
make
Okay, so to talk about this for a second, it's always said in the context of praising Allah. So Allah, or the author of the Quran, expects us and will punish us for not doing it. expects us to praise him for something that we can't understand or express in words. And we should be like, let me explain it this way. If I just told you about an impossible phenomenon that is almost paradoxical, right? If I demonstrated it to you in front of you and I tell you, this is a paradox, and I just did it, maybe you might be impressed. Maybe you, the critically minded of you, wouldn't just be impressed and say, oh my God, I worship you. You are amazing. You do everything. No, the critically minded would say, hold up, hold up. Explain this to me. How did you not do it? And maybe after explaining it to you multiple times, dude, I literally just did a miracle. I literally did paradox. I just can't explain it to you. You can't understand me. Some people might still not believe that that makes me a god. It's a non sequitur to say, I did a paradox and demonstrated it, therefore I am God. That doesn't follow that. And some people, and excuse me for saying this, some people are sometimes more gullible. So if you show them something amazing, you distract them from the question itself. Is this God? Is this not God? You just demonstrated this is something they can't understand. Therefore, I have the authority to tell you what is true or not. What's happening here is neither of those examples, because God isn't even demonstrating that we do have free will and God does know everything, and we can observe that paradox and then think, wow, this is amazing. Let's just use this paradox and God's ability to affirm, or what was the word that he used? To recognize God's power.
Don't do anything because you cannot do anything.
Let's hear what he
It's
said.
always done in the context of praising Allah's magnificence and Allah's power. It is never done.
So if Allah had demonstrated to us this paradox and then expected us to praise him for his power in to be able to do it, like I said, there's flaws with that, but that's not even what's happening here. What's happening here is we've got men telling us that this paradox is possible for Allah. It is actually what's happening. And we should praise Allah for that paradox happening. You haven't demonstrated the paradox is true to begin with. And then Yasir Qadhi pivots in his little answer here, in this part of the answer, I mean, to talk about God doesn't tell you sit around and do nothing. God gives you a lot of commands in the Quran. I don't think the question here is about whether you should sit on your butt and do nothing because you don't have free will or not. That's not the question, but I'll let him answer.
Ever done to tell us don't do anything because you cannot do anything. Al-aqs, the Quran always tells us i''malu wa qul i'malu, right? And Allah tells us to pray and Allah tells us to fast. The entire Quran is commandments.
Why we have
okay?
to make ilm
So-
and He written upon us what we're gonna
so
do.
when
What's
the
the purpose
Quran-
of the dua then?
So
If
when
He
the
wrote
Quran,
that,
no,
will you
to
be
affirm,
sick
to affirm Allah's power and to therefore submit to Allah's magnificence without affecting our actions.
That's a very good question. What is the purpose of prayer, dua, if it doesn't affect qadar, predestination, if it doesn't affect what's going to happen or God's will, let's call it that? And Yasir Qadhi says, what? He says, I don't know, it doesn't make
Or
sense.
submit to Allah,
Sick or
to affirm Allah's power and to therefore submit to Allah's magnificence without
To affirm Allah's power. So when we pray for something, we don't pray for something because we think the prayer is going to make it happen, but it's just to affirm Allah's power and ability to make it happen, I guess.
without affecting our actions. The Quran is full of action-based verbs. So that's what I'm trying to say is, to be very simplistic, and again, this is a quick Q&A, so I know
No.
yani the critics can always deconstruct everything, but I have to
Oh,
say
hey,
something that
I
comes
appreciate-
across as contradictory. We affirm Allah's
I
omnipotence,
appreciate the shout out for that.
Affirm
we
it.
cannot reach to the
but
understanding.
we affirm Allah's magnificence.
Yeah, we know
And
that.
we, khalas. But we don't know what is written for our
But how
qadr.
to worship, say, Sheikh? Again, this is not my talk, but I'm bringing even kalam
Yeah.
al-mulhideen. Yani,
Wait, I
Allah's
gotta go back.
is nafi, that we affirm all of this and we live our lives as if we have this
I might have
contradictory.
skipped a little
Without
bit, my bad.
affecting our actions. The Quran is full of action-based verbs. So that's what I'm trying to say is, to be very simplistic, and again, this is a quick Q&A, so I know
No.
yani the critics can always deconstruct everything, but I have to say something that comes across as contradictory. We affirm Allah's omnipotence, Allah's all-powerful, Allah's mashia is nafi, that we affirm all of this, and we live our lives as if we have free will.
without understanding.
No, we affirm
We
it.
cannot reach to the
But
understanding.
we
It comes across as contradictory. We affirm Allah's ability and Allah's knowledge, and we act as if we have free will. Okay.
affirm Allah's magnificence.
Yeah, we know
And
that.
khalas. But we don't know what is written for our
But how
qadr.
to worship, Sheikh? Again, this is not my talk, but I'm bringing even.
I don't necessarily have a problem with what he just said there. Like, let me explain that we live as if we have free will. I sort of agree with that, like I said, and I'll explain more later. But what he's saying, we affirm God's knowledge and power and ability. That's a claim. Like he's saying it doesn't make sense, but let's double down on a claim. And I want to make something clear here. I didn't choose this video because I think Yasir Qadhi said something so scandalous or so awful or so morally bad in some way. It's because I want to highlight how this conversation we don't hear happen very often. We don't hear other sheikhs ask each other or themselves straight up simple questions like, I know the answer is difficult, but give me the answer to this question. We don't hear these conversations often. So I wanted to highlight that. I commend the other sheikh for asking him questions, though he might be doing it not because he's, again, I don't know his intentions. God knows everyone's intentions. But the way that I understood the politics behind this is they disagree on some things, and some people in the congregation of the Imam disagree with Yasir Qadhi, and they want to corner him into saying his opinion as clearly as possible. As he said in the beginning in the introduction, you've answered some of these questions before, but we'd like to get some clarifications. So Yasir Qadhi is basically saying it's a paradox, but we live as if we have free will. That's what he's saying so far.
Even كلام الملحدين, يعني the atheist people or whatever.
Okay, hear this.
Khalas. But we don't know what is written for our
But how
qadr.
to worship, Sheikh? Again, this is not my talk, but I'm bringing even كلام الملحدين, يعني the atheist people or whatever. They ask this question, and if you do not know Allah, because now you said we cannot imagine how Allah is written everything upon us, and we also should do وَقَلْ اعْمَلُوا فَسَيَرَ اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ. So the question here is coming that how could you worship someone, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you don't know the simple question, the simplest question in the world, which is Allah has written everything upon us. Why we have to make dua? Why we have to worship? He written upon us, will we be in Jannah or hellfire? Why we have to?
It's a very simple response to this.
I would love to hear the Imam's answer to that question, not just Yasir Qadhi's. He doesn't get to the answer to that question. I would like to know, like, this interview has made me want to ask the Imam a lot more questions. So I hope that we hear his thoughts about it someday, or maybe I'll do some digging afterwards. But that's a very good question that some atheists, among other people, ask. If God already knows who's going to hell and heaven, like, how do we know? And we can't understand God. First of all, how do I know that God is the truth so I can then worship God? And secondly, what is the point if it's already predetermined?
To this, you do not know what is written. So you
I know that.
assume what is written is what you want.
Let me ask in different way, Sheikh. Being that Allah has written, you will be in Jannah or
Wait, hold up. Yasir Qadhi says you do not know what is written. You're assuming what is written. I don't know if God has will and God knows everyone's, what's going to happen at the end. I may not know my fate, so to speak, but I know that statistically, and I've brought this problem up so many times, most people who are born in a religion either stay in it or leave it, but don't join another one. Most people don't. It's just a statistical fact. Most people born in a certain area have better odds of going to heaven if Islam is true. And most people born in a certain other area have worse odds because they, like, for them to not only stop believing in what they believe, but then go to a different religion that tells them straight up, it's a paradox, but you just have to affirm it. God set them up to fail. So it's not just about does God exist or not. It's why did God doom most of humanity to go to hell? It's a very good question. And Yasir Qadhi says, you don't know each person's, I mean, I've heard that answer before. I don't know if that's exactly what he's saying, but the standard answer is you don't know what every person's fate is, so you can't assume it. But I could tell you that statistically, we can tell what the average fate of that group of population is. At least I'm not saying I know what's going to happen after life, but I'm saying according to the rules of Islam, most of the people in a certain population that's not a Muslim population, most of them are born non-Muslim and are going to hell because they're never going to accept Islam. I don't need to know the granular level of knowledge and knowing every single person's circumstance in life to know that there's a statistical cluster there. So it's evasive to say that it's only, you don't know every single person's fate, so you can't answer that.
or hellfire, والعياذ بالله. Why he is punishing?
Let's hear that.
Let me ask in different way, Sheikh. Being that Allah has written, you will be in Jannah or hellfire, والعياذ بالله. Why he is punishing you?
Wal-'iyadhu billah means, again, it's similar to a'udhu billah, and we ask God for his protection from that. I just want to highlight that because I want, if someone's not a believer or is a believer that doesn't understand this part, a lot of believers live life like this, that just the mere mention, you know, he's putting a hypothetical, whether someone goes to heaven, or he's talking about Yasir Qadhi or himself, whether you go to heaven or hell, and may God protect us from that hell. Like, you have to say it in the middle of the sentence because it's that scary, or because maybe it's a habit that, like, you see how terrifying it is when you live in a reality that you believe that most people are going to hell. Like, I want to know what that Imam believes. He thinks it's predetermined, maybe, and he thinks most people are going to hell because God wants it that way. How is he still very positive about it? That's what I'm curious about. But he says in the middle of the sentence, may God protect us or you or me from that fate, because it's that scary. Let's hear it again.
You will be in Jannah or hellfire, والعياذ بالله. Why he is punishing you, and he written before you come that you will be among hellfire people or Jannah people.
Jayyid. So this question has been asked since the beginning of time, before Islam.
Nah.
And it was asked in the time. And Iblis himself is making i'tirad of Allah Azza wa Jal, that قال ربي بما أغويتني. Iblis himself احتج بالقدر. He used.
So sorry to interrupt so often, but there's so much that they're not saying. So he says this question has been asked since before Islam. I think in the context of a religion that is built on a similar foundation, that God knows everything, but then he's going to send you to hell anyway. Yes, the question has been asked, but it's not a by default that everyone alive has been asking the question about this specific God. Like, sure, in monotheistic or whatever religions that have to do with an omnipotent God that knows everything that's going to happen, that question might have been asked since before Islam. And I don't know what him saying that question has always been asked does. It doesn't really support his position. Maybe he means to say that no one will ever find the answer. But the verse that he cites, I can't remember exactly what it was. Let me see if I can't pull it up on screen right now, but it was verse 39 of Surah, I forgot what it was, number 15. And it says, قَالَ رَبِّ بِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي لَأُزَيِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَأَغْوِيَنَّهُمْ جَمِيعًا. Iblis, meaning the devil, was saying to God, with what you have, my Lord, because you have put me in error, I will surely make disobedience attractive to humanity and on earth, and I will mislead them all. So he's using it as an excuse, basically, or saying, you did this to me, God, you determined that I'll be doing this action, to Adam and Eve, or like to tempt them and bring humanity to earth. So because you did that, I will continue to try to tempt people. And I think that's a very good question. The Sheikh is asking, what's Shaitan's fault? What is the devil's fault in all of this? So what does Yasir Qadhi have to say?
He used qadr to justify what he had done. You were
sorry, Yasir Qadhi was the one who actually cited that verse, which is very interesting to me.
One who did this. You set it up, basically. It was already flawed from the beginning. And at some level,
the question is, Sheikh, why Allah is punishing Iblis?
Yeah,
this is the question.
This is why Hallaj himself said the same thing.
And I'm asking the question that why he is punishing Iblis, and he written upon Iblis, he will be disobeying Allah.
So
this is the question.
So this
why he's punishing non-believers, and he has written upon them, they will be non-believers before even became.
Again, Sheikh, you're asking, mashallah, very philosophical questions, and this Q&A has 10 questions. And I have given actually not just an entire lecture, I've written a paper about this topic.
If you need a paper to answer a simple question, I have a feeling that that's not really a satisfactory answer. If you can't, I mean, you don't have to give us the entire paper summary right now, but if you could just tell us the points, if you could just say, if I had time, I will talk about A, B, C, D, and E, and that will all tie it together and make the answer clear. Then at least I'll be like, okay, all right, let's hear him out. But he's saying, wait, I wanted to highlight something. Let's hear it again. Because he said something about philosophers.
And Sheikh, you're asking, mashallah, very philosophical questions. And
you're asking very philosophical questions. Hold on to that nugget right there. it'll be relevant later in the video. Yes, I've seen that part, and you'll see.
Q&A has in a paper about this topic. Every single firqa, from the Mu'tazila to the Maturidi to the Asha'ira to the Atharis, has a response to this. Every firqa.
No.
But, and I'm being honest with you, every one of their responses, it will not satisfy the philosopher. It will not satisfy even
That
the
means
Ammi.
simply.
Okay, so hear me out. You're asking good philosophical questions, and every single group of thinkers or creed or Islamic school of thought, every single one of them has a different answer, and none of them would satisfy the philosopher, is what Yasir Qadhi is saying. Why is the philosopher doomed to go to hell? Because he doesn't believe in your version of reality. You admittedly just said it's a good philosophical question, but philosophers wouldn't accept the answer. So he just uncovered a category of people that is so underrepresented in Islam. If the answers to the questions won't satisfy philosophers, then if you are someone who's philosophically minded, you're more likely to fall into doubt, if so to speak, the way that they phrase it that way. You're more likely to see that people have been arguing these questions for thousands of years, and that you're more likely to conclude, not necessarily that you're right in your position, but that all positions are not even just as likely as each other. You conclude that there's no one position that is that clear as the sun, as Yasir Qadhi seems to believe, while actually affirming that it's a paradox. Like, it's such a paradox, the position that Yasir Qadhi is in. He's basically admitting, if you're philosophically minded, this won't satisfy you. So what you need to do, and that's not to the person who's not a believer, you as a Muslim, you just have to say, Sami'na wa ata'na. You say, we heard and we obey. We affirm God's greatness, and we move on, and we live as if we have free will, because no answer is going to satisfy you. So basically, he's saying there is no answer. And Hassan Radwan says, he said, won't satisfy the philosopher and the ordinary people. I might have missed that. Let's hear it again.
Of their responses, it will not satisfy the philosopher. It will not satisfy even the Ammi.
Simply, people are Jabriyin.
So
we are determinists.
So the answers to the question won't satisfy the philosopher or the ordinary people. So who are the answers really satisfying then?
People.
That's it. No, I don't believe this at all. Al-aqs, no.
Let's hear it again.
Deterministic people.
Even
that
the Ammi.
Simply, people are Jabriyin. So we are deterministic people. That's it.
No, I don't believe this at all. Al-aqs, no. To say that we are Jabri,
yes, Sheikh.
No, I don't.
He wrote everything on you.
Yeah. So
I want to highlight something. So the Imam says people are deterministic. God wrote everything that's going to happen to you. And Yasir Qadhi says, no, al-aqs, meaning al-aqs means the opposite. Yasir Qadhi is saying we're the opposite of predetermined or deterministic. We have free will. But everything he said hasn't pointed to why he believes that. I think it all falls back on because God said it's possible and God can do anything. I wish he just said it in simpler. I mean, he basically said that actually, but I wish people heard that. So I'm repeating it for people to hear. The position that Yasir Qadhi has is it's paradoxical, but God can do it. The position that the other guy has, the Imam has, which is the one I'm actually more curious about right now. No, it's all predetermined. I want to ask that Imam, so what do you think about Shaitan being punished for what God ordered him to do? What do you think about all the people who were God willed will go to hell before they were even created? I want to know that other Sheikh's answer, but let's hear what Yasir Qadhi has to say again.
Yeah, so
and you don't know how to fix the problem or how to answer the question.
No, we don't know what is written.
Sheikh, we don't have even free will to think about the answer of the question.
No, that's not free will. We don't have the level of intelligence. We don't have
means free will. We don't have this free willing.
Sheikh, we are finite beings. Allah created us. لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون.
Again, this is not my view.
Okay. So much to cover. So لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون. Something like that. So Yasir Qadhi is quoting, I believe it's a verse where, and somebody correct me if it's a hadith, God says, God is not asked about what he does. God is not asked about what he does. So basically, the answer is the answer, and don't ask God why, because you're too simple to understand it.
Allah created us. لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون.
Again, this is...
God is not asked about what he does, but they are asked about what they do. Archer Walid asks a very good question. Why did they post it? I mean, no, I appreciate that they posted this, but I think what the commenter is asking, why did they post this if we don't have the ability to understand the answer? What's the point of all that? I'm glad that they posted it anyway, but I want to highlight something that the Imam said that I think is very good.
of intelligence. We
Well,
don't
that
have the
means
aql
free
to
will. We
understand.
don't have this free willing.
Sheikh, we are finite beings.
So the Imam says we don't have the free will to know the answer to this or to understand this. And Yasir Qadhi affirms, no, we have the free will, we just don't have the intellectual capacity or the ability because we're finite. But effectively, isn't it the same thing? If I gave you the choice, you can say, for example, here's a simple example. I'm with you in a room and I say, you don't have the capacity to leave this room. You don't have the key that gets you out of this room. And excuse the example, please. I'm not going to kidnap anybody. But it's a hypothetical. We're in a room. You don't have the key, the capacity to get out of that room, but you have a passport that lets you into any nation in the world. So you have the free will to be a citizen of the earth anywhere you want. You have that free will, but you don't have the ability to get out of the room. You don't have the capacity to escape the room and move yourself to be a citizen of any country that you want. So do you have the free will to be a national of any country that you want or not? If you're limited by your capacity to do the thing or understand the thing, if my cat, okay, this is a better example. If my cat, hello, say hello. If he has a passport that lets him into any country in the world, but he doesn't possess the language skills, I can tell him right now, what are you doing right here? You could be in a better house. You can show people how amazing it is that you can be a citizen of any country. He doesn't have the capacity to actually act on it, to understand that he has that will. So does he have the free will to be a citizen of any country? That's the example that I'm using. So I'm siding with the Imam on this one. Do people actually have free will? Yasir Qadhi says we do, but we don't have the ability. So effectively, we don't have free will. And this is a very good way of putting it. All the responsibility, none of the agency.
Allah created us.
No.
لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون.
Again, this is
We
not
have to
my
put
view.
our-
Just I'm conveying
No,
the views.
we have to humble ourselves. We didn't
Wait, hold on a second. I missed that before. The Imam is saying, this is not my view. I'm conveying the views. I would like to know his view then. Because, well, I guess his view is that it's all deterministic. But, I mean, that is his view.
choose our life. We
That
didn't
means we are
choose to be
Jabriyyin.
created.
Okay, that means
we
we are
didn't
Jabriyyin.
choose the circumstances of our birth. We didn't choose the era we were
Yes,
born
that
in.
means
We didn't
prove that we are Jabris.
So it's not a matter of
Jabris means like deterministic, that we don't have free will. It's all deterministic.
Jabris. We thank Allah for existence.
Sheikh, how come that you don't choose to be born? You don't choose will you go Jannah or Nar, and you still not Jabri?
Because right now the way you act is completely free will. What you are saying right now is coming from your free will.
But Allah
That's
has
why I'm
written it.
saying. So you don't allow the intellectual affirmation of Allah's majesty to affect your actions.
No.
You don't do this for your daily routine. You don't do this reading.
Wait, before we get to that point, I think that Yasir Qadhi let something slip that is actually very detrimental to his point. And I don't know if that happened because he wasn't paying attention or not. Let's hear it again.
Free will.
But
That's
Allah,
way you
you don't choose will you go Jannah or Nar, and you
Existence,
Sheikh, how
because
come that you don't
existence-
choose to be born? You don't choose will you go Jannah or Nar, and you still not Jabri?
because right now the way you
Yasir Qadhi just says because he doesn't say no. So the Imam was saying you don't choose a bunch of examples. You don't choose whether you go to Jannah or not, heaven or fire or hell. And Yasir Qadhi basically agreed to it. I don't know if he intended to do that, but he basically agreed, yes, you don't choose whether you go to heaven or hell, but you have free will right now, or at least you act as if you have free will right now. But he just conceded by moving on with the conversation, you don't choose whether you go to heaven or hell. I mean, maybe he can say, well, obviously you don't choose that, but you can choose your actions that'll get you to heaven or hell. But what the Imam is saying is you don't choose your fate. It's already been sealed since before anything happened. And Yasir Qadhi just keeps affirming, no, you have free will right now to do it. How? I don't know, but that's part of Allah's greatness. That's Yasir's point.
way you act is completely free will. What you are saying right now is coming from your free will.
But Allah
That's
has
why I'm
written it.
saying. So you don't allow the intellectual affirmation of Allah's majesty to affect your actions.
No.
You don't do this for your daily routine. You don't do this for eating and drinking. You don't do this for your job. You don't do this for your this. Only when it comes to the deen and when it comes to believing in Allah, do such people come and start saying, oh, why should I worship Allah when Allah Azza wa Jal has written something? When it comes to eating and drinking, they don't just sit there and say, if Allah has will is going to jump into my mouth, right? So they selectively use this hujjah when it comes to religiosity. And when
Okay, I do not appreciate that accusation, and I'll tell you why for a couple of reasons. So he's saying that those people, like I guess they're talking about atheists or we're not talking about Muslims right now. The people who have these questions that say, he's also misrepresenting the question. Like for example, I don't believe that God does have the power and God did doom me to hell. Therefore, I'm going to sit around and be like, what's the point? I'm going to hell anyway. That's not my position. My position is, if that is true, which is the deterministic way, which is what Islam presents it as, or at least the way that seems to be most coherent, if that is true, then that impeaches upon, maybe I'm not using that word correctly, that overrides the claim that God is fair and just. If it's predetermined, it's not just. We're just acting out a live action version of a drama that God wrote since before we existed. That is my position. And therefore, I conclude that this is not cohesive. This doesn't add up together. Something about this is wrong. So the more likely explanation is this is a story that people have come up with, and they might have believed it at the time, but I don't think it makes sense. What Yasir Qadhi is saying, that those people, whoever those people are, only get this nitpicky about free will and the ability to do things and predetermination and predestination only when it comes to religion as a hujjah, as a reason, as an excuse not to be religious. But when it comes to other stuff, they don't sit around and be like, okay, well, if God willed me to eat, I'll eat. They actually get up and eat. Here's the difference. First explanation is, it's not that I believe that God is real and therefore I'm just conceding to what's going to happen. So it follows that I'm not going to sit around and be like, if God wills me to eat, I'll eat. I don't believe that God exists, at least not in that way. Then I will get up and eat, because if I don't, I will die. And that's my second point. I have proof of people not eating and dying. Malnutrition is a real phenomenon. So when someone acts on evidence and deduction and things that they can observe on stimulus, on the feeling of hunger, that is a very different case than someone saying, I won't worship this God because the way you're describing it doesn't make sense and it's contradictory. And if what you're saying is true, then your God deemed me to go to hell. Like, he can't use that level of abstraction to zoom out for a little bit and think, that person isn't doing it not because they believe God is real and they're just sitting around and accepting their will. They're saying that I don't believe it's real. And if it were, there's nothing for me to do about it. Because this isn't just about action. This is about belief and being convinced of things. So it's not about whether I'm going to get up and pray or not, just an action, a physical action. If I don't think that this adds up, and I don't, I can get up and do the motions. I can go to mosque with my friends. I can do everything. I would still go to hell because I don't believe that it's true. So then we get into, what was that, Pascal's wager? Why don't I do it anyway, just in case it's true? I don't believe that God would, if God were describing it the way that Islam does, I don't believe that God would like it if I'm just going through the motions just in case, and I'm not going through the motions with every other religion at the same time. So I guess I'm going to hell in those other religions if they're true. It's not about action, it's about belief. So he's conflating a bunch of things here, and he's using an example of people won't get malnourished and die compared to people won't believe in something that's contradictory. That's my point here.
And when it comes to deen, they never are consistent. If they were consistent,
and for me now, when I'm conveying the question, I'm asking about everything.
Let's hear it again.
Say if Allah has will is going to jump. When it comes to believing in Allah, do such. You don't allow the intellectual affirmation of Allah's majesty to affect your actions. No. You don't do this for your daily routine. You don't do this for eating and drinking. You don't do this for your job. You don't do this for your this. only when it comes to the deen and when it comes to believing in Allah do such people come and start saying, oh, why should I worship Allah when Allah Azza wa Jal has written something? When it comes to eating and drinking, they don't just sit there and say, if Allah has will, is going to jump into my mouth, right? So they selectively use this hujjah when it comes to religiosity and when it comes to deen. They never are consistent. If they were consistent.
And for me now, when I'm conveying the question.
Right, before answering the consistency part, he's making inferences about the person who's asking the question, not the imam, but whoever the imam's relaying, if that's not the imam's question himself. He's making inferences about their intention and their inconsistency with that thinking. He's talking about a hypothetical straw man here, person that he's never met who believes God is real but won't do anything about it. He's not talking about the average typical case of someone who doesn't believe, because this is all paradoxical and contradictory to each other. And not only that, but I disagree. So my question that I still face today, like, not how can Allah make this all happen despite it being paradoxical? Do we have free will while Allah has all the power? That question is gone. In my mind, Allah isn't real. This is a story. So my question becomes, do I have free will, irrespective of religion? That's a whole other question. And that's why I'm saying be careful, because he's mixing up a lot of different contexts, not intentionally, but I think he needs to be more precise about it. I ask myself all the time, do humans have free will, or is it all predetermined somehow, or deterministic? Predetermined might make it seem like someone or some entity sat down and like wrote down what's going to happen. That's not one of the possibilities in my mind. In my mind, there might be more than these, but the two that I'm highlighting here, either everyone has absolutely free will, or we're talking about the factors around you lead you to make certain decisions. Your circumstances, the temperature, what you ate that day, which what you ate that day might be influenced by impulses that have to do with your chemistry or with your surroundings. So how far back does it go? So my position on this, very briefly, is I don't think we have ultimate free will. I think we are biological machines. We have to act. I agree with Yasir Qadhi. We have to act as if we have free will, because that's the only option that there is. Basically, you just live your life. But I personally don't just sit around and be like, if God wants me to eat, I'll eat. That's such a silly example. I think to myself, what makes me more inclined to eat? For example, say I have an inclination to eat a certain kind of chips all the time, despite knowing that it's unhealthy for me. What makes me feel that way? Am I doing that by free will? Why am I statistically more likely to eat that chips when something bad has happened throughout my day? For example, I try to highlight and notice and do something about predispositions and things that affect my so-called free will. I don't think we have free will. I think we have some degree of stimulated or simulated will. And a lot of stimulus and a lot of circumstance affect us in ways that we might not always be aware of. But I try my best to be aware of them and learn more about my body and about my mind and how we think. And I'm very early on in that process, and I'm very young. And hopefully someday I'll learn even more about myself. So no, that's to answer Yasir Qadhi saying they don't think about this except when it comes to religion. I think about it not even about your religion, way past leaving your religion. So unfortunately, you are wrong, Yasir Qadhi.
The question I'm asking about everything, even the food, even eating and drinking.
So nobody lives their life according to this philosophy. No. Only when it comes to tadayyun and religiosity and belief do they start bringing up
they start asking
hujjah bil qadar.
Okay, because of the time, go ahead. You wanted to conclude something?
Yeah, the conclusion is very simple.
Yep.
In my humble opinion, we affirm Allah's majesty and we live our lives as if we have complete free will. This is the solution of this problem, because you will never understand. Yani the assumption that you will be able to fully comprehend qadar is the assumption that your ilm will understand Allah's ilm.
Ilm means knowledge. So he's saying the assumption that you'd be able to fully understand qadar, meaning destiny or fate, implies that your knowledge would understand. I don't know why he's phrasing it that way, but that your knowledge is greater than God's knowledge. But who set it up that way? Like, he's putting up this obstacle that nobody asked for, that if Allah is real, Allah has set up that way. Allah has set it up so that you can't understand. You can't even express it in language. And to understand it, you'd have to know more than God. God could have set it up in a way that you don't even have to know more than God to understand how a concept is doable. For example, say I designed the first engine, right? Gasoline engine, for example. But you can understand, put gas in the engine, car go forward. You can understand that. You don't have to understand more than me about how the engine works to understand that, yeah, it makes sense. Combustion, things blow up. I don't understand exactly how to make sure that the pressure is not too high, not too low, all that kind of stuff. But the average person, you explain it to them, they can say, okay, I believe you. I can see it happen in front of me. But according to him, Allah set it up so that free will and predetermination or predestination or fate are a paradox. And in order to understand it, you have to have more knowledge than God himself. I don't think that's even true. To understand a concept, you have to have more knowledge than the originator of the concept or than the holder of that idea. But if that were true, the person who set it up that way, the entity that set it up that way is God. So why? Why is that such a trap? Like, what is so enticing to God, not only about prayer and wanting to be worshipped and revered and affirmed and all these things, but especially in the dark, and putting barriers to make it so that it's impossible to be sure of what you're praying to in the dark? What is so appealing to God about praise and praise through blind faith? Like, is he looking for just the most gullible of the gullible who are going to go the extra mile without any evidence? What makes that great?
Your ilm will understand Allah's ilm. And this is a very arrogant assumption. Allah created us. Our ilm is mahdud, ma'qul is
I'm
very...
not talking about ilm, I'm talking about al-mashi'a.
So
and
the
my
same goes.
question was
The
so
same
simple.
goes.
Sorry, we got to hear this again because there is an accusation of arrogance here.
Ilm will understand. The assumption that you will be able to fully comprehend qadr is the assumption that your ilm will understand Allah's ilm. Your ilm will understand Allah's ilm. And this is a very arrogant assumption.
So he ascribes arrogance to people who want to understand how this paradox is possible. So he's shifting it from it's impossible. I mean, there's a commentator here who highlighted it. He's basically saying, we don't really understand, so drop it. No, he's going even further. He's saying, drop it, and it's arrogant of you to even want to understand it. Yeah. But if it was any other religion, he would use it as proof as to why that religion makes no sense. As Hassan Alam pointed out earlier about the Holy Trinity, if you try to talk to a believer, very often the topic of a Holy Trinity comes up, even if you're not a Christian, even if no one talked about Christianity. They see it as the alternative to monotheism or the alternative to Islam. And if you try to explain to them why the Holy Trinity makes sense, they would say, that's a paradox. How can three be one? That doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? This is obviously nonsense. And I get that. I mean, that's how we feel about what you're saying about your religion. Please just have that awareness. Because if you do, I mean, if you're humble about what you believe, if you're not arrogant, like he brought up arrogance now, if you believe what you believe as a Muslim, as whatever else, and you're humble about that position, and you understand why others might not believe it, despite you repeating the assertions on and on again, that would make you question your entire life and your belief system. You would think, why am I so sure of what I'm sure about? And how does this person, if I genuinely believe that they're honest about what they're telling me, how do they deserve hell? Like, I want to ask that first, the Imam, that question. But instead, Yasir Qadhi says, it's arrogant of you to expect to understand, to have more knowledge than God. I didn't set it up that way. You did, or God did.
Allah created us. Our ilm is mahdud, ma'qul is very...
I'm not talking about ilm, I'm talking about al-mashi'a.
So the same goes.
My question was so simple, but you...
The other Imam is saying, I'm not talking about knowledge, I'm talking about will. My question was very simple.
said that we cannot even think about it. Actually, Sheikh Jabri people, they said, وَالسُّؤَالُ عَنْهُ بِدْعَةٌ. يعني it's the same thing. خلاص.
Jabri people, deterministic people, or people who believe in determinism, say questioning this is temptation to stray off the straight path, basically. Questioning this is innovation. It's bad to question this, is what the Imam is saying.
خلاص, we are Jabriyin and we cannot and we have not. We must not ask about this, about these questions.
So, Sheikh,
and that's it.
The problem comes, the other group brings a very valid point, and that is that to claim that Allah has no control over the creation is really tanqis. It is
No.
a very, very disrespectful thing to say, which actually
I have to interject here. So why is that dichotomy there? It doesn't have to be that way. So a dichotomy is splitting into two options basically. Either God has free will. Sorry, we have free will, and God knows about it, and it's paradoxical, yet it makes sense somehow. Or things are deterministic, and God has no power over the universe. I don't think it has to be split that way, and maybe I'm just thinking out loud here. But what if it's deterministic, and it's not that God has no power to do anything about it, but God already set it in motion that way. It's happening exactly in the way that God wanted it to happen. So that doesn't mean that God is powerless. So he didn't make room for that option. And maybe I'm missing something here, but I feel like he's just splitting it into two. Either God doesn't have all the knowledge, which is impossible because by definition, God has all the knowledge. Again, not by proof, not by evidence, but by definition. So going back to his definition, therefore, it must be the paradox that's true. Yeah, it's confusing.
actually
what
eliminates,
Mu'tazila said, but
which actually eliminates
Al-Mu'tazila
Let's hear it again.
creation is aim to claim that Allah has no control over the creation is really tanqis. It is a very, very disrespectful thing to say, which actually
what
eliminates,
Mu'tazila said, but
which actually eliminates.
المعتزلة شيخ اختاروا طريقهم. They
Yeah,
chosen
they
their
chose
way.
their way.
I don't
And
agree with them, but
they have
they
to-
said
yeah,
خلاص
that's-
أنت مخير completely.
Yeah.
Allah does not create evil.
Yes,
If you make evil, you are the one who choose that.
And these
And I don't
issues-
believe in that. Just I need another question, another
Yes.
answer fixes the problem.
So these issues, Sheikh, have been debated for thousands of years on all of the firaq. And frankly, nobody has an answer that is 5 minute long that convinces the mukhalif.
No.
You only convince your own group.
No.
This is what I'm saying. You see Ra'y al-Ayn, you see it yourself. That's this question.
He is so incredibly close. He's so close to realizing it. So every group has an answer that satisfies that group only, and doesn't satisfy the mukhalif, the opposition, the person who disagrees. Don't you see how that is a trap right there? Don't you see how that's a problem? Like, you're almost spelling it out. Also, that's a very good point. We have more people watching than the number of likes on this stream. The math isn't adding up, so give it a like, people, please. Getting back to what Yasir Qadhi was saying.
Is beyond the capability of the average person to understand. Really, you see this because you tell me we have 4,000 years of recorded philosophical history. We have history beyond religion. We have the philosophers who didn't believe in any religion. Nobody has solved this problem in a simplistic 5-minute solution that people can understand.
No, let me amend that answer. Nobody has found a clear, provable answer, period. Not in 5 minutes, not in a paper, not in a lifetime. And that should be a problem. I've always said this. If two people can disagree about a philosophical matter, and both of them, they're not disagreeing because they have bad intentions or because one is a bad kafir person and one is a good, pious person. They're disagreeing because they can't see it from each other's point of view, and neither of them has definitive evidence. Then how could you say that based on their philosophical position, one of them deserves to rot in hell forever, and God knew that was going to happen, and it's fair at the same time? That is the problem here. It's so bizarre to me that he can almost recognize the problem or spell it out but not recognize it. He's saying these things have been debated for thousands of years and there's no clear answer. That's the problem right there. It's not about someone's intention of wanting to join Islam or not wanting to join Islam. The truth is, you only convince your own group, as he said. And I just hope more people would let that sink in.
So do you think that we can solve it right here? It's not going to happen. The response, Shaykhana, is where there should be a level of humility, that what can I understand, what cannot understand? And we have to also deal with waqi'. You exist. You exist right here and now. Okay, what are you going to do with your existence? You have to think about who created me. What is the purpose of existence?
Sure.
What's going to happen after my death?
And my answer about this issue, it's so simple. Being that we cannot know and understand, like what you said, choose your position. Either you مخير like Mu'tazila, or you Jabri like the
You should
Umayyads and these
act like
guys.
you're mukhayyar.
يا جبري يا
Even
مسير.
the
وخلاص
Jabri
يا عم
acts
شيخ.
like they're mukhayyar. That's the reality. Only when it comes to tadayyun, they say, oh, we're Jabr, majbur. But when it comes to everything else, even the hardcore Jabri lives his life like he's mukhayyar.
So let me think about that for a second. I want to answer a couple of comments first. NA says, you only convince your own group. Certainly applies to the other side as well. Here's the thing. I'm not in the business of convincing people of things, but even if I were, I don't take the position that I am morally superior, and it's self-evident almost. Like a lot of believers think it's clear as day, Islam is true. I acknowledge that I could be wrong about my position. A Muslim should never acknowledge that. Ideally, they should never think, I could be wrong about Allah being true. And I'm not saying that for me. I'm saying a good believer has to double down and affirm, despite a paradox, despite a contradiction, Allah is real. Despite a contradiction, I deserve to go to hell if I don't affirm that Allah is real. That's the difference between the two sides here. And I take that position on most things in life, if not all things in life. I could be wrong. If I see something, or if someone convinces me or tells me something that I find convincing, I will change my mind. But the religious position is it's true, despite seeing that a lot of people are set up to fail, despite acknowledging that there's no evidence or reason to it that humans would understand, despite being bigger than humanity, it's true somehow. That's the difference here. So let's hear what he just said again, because I want to say something.
That's the reality. Only when it comes to tadayyun, they say, oh, we're Jabr, majbur. But when it comes to everything else, even the hardcore Jabri lives his life like he's mukhayyar.
So he's saying deterministic people, only when it comes to religion, they're deterministic. When it comes to everything else, they live their life as if they have free will. I don't know who he's talking about exactly. I feel like he's strawmanning a bunch of different people. Like, is he talking about believers who are deterministic, or people who leave Islam or don't believe in Islam because they see that it's too deterministic to be fair? But he's mixing up a lot of different groups and basically saying they're not consistent. Therefore, you should follow my assertion despite it being inconsistent with itself. Maybe I'm mischaracterizing him. Let's hear him one more time. I think this is the end of that segment, so it shouldn't take us too much.
Act like you're mukhayyar.
يا جبري يا مسير.
Even the
وخلاص
Jabri
يا عم
acts
شيخ.
like they're mukhayyar. That's the reality. Only when it comes to tadayyun, they say, oh, we're Jabr, majbur. But when it comes to everything else, even the hardcore Jabri lives his life like he's mukhayyar.
طيب شيخنا, and I know the questions are so difficult and it's not that easy to answer it in
Okay, so I think I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I'm going to take it to mean even the person who believes in determinism would act as if they have free will, but when it comes to religion, they act like it's deterministic. Again, I don't know who he's talking about here, so I would have to hear from a deterministic believer or Muslim believer to tell me they believe in determinism, and then where do they take it from there? Like the sheikh, for example, the imam who's asking the questions, I would like to know from him. He does believe in determinism. It sounds like that. It's his simple answer, his simple solution to all these problems. So how come he lives life as if he has free will? That's not even the question that I would have for him necessarily. It's how come he is okay with that, and how does he reconcile that with fairness? Like, how is that fair? So I'm not going to be too harsh on Yasir Qadhi for that point, but yeah, that was I believe most of what I wanted to say about this segment. And I'm thinking about doing another one maybe next week about another part of it where he's talking about, the next part, or one of the next parts is, can you pray for a non-Muslim? Can you pray? Because there are verses that say it's haram to pray for a non-Muslim. It's not allowed to pray for a dead non-Muslim. God doesn't like that. We'll get into that next time. And I also wanted to point out that there is an apology in the comments section. So let me show that again. So the sheikh, the imam who's asking the question says, this is Imam Bakeer. I want to clarify that my approach in this interview with respected scholar Yasir Qadhi was to represent opposing views for the sake of constructive dialogue. My deepest respect goes out to him, and I align with a lot of his opinions. I apologize if my demeanor and interruptions weren't proper. I love and respect Yasir Qadhi. He is my close friend, and I consider him as one of the top knowledgeable scholars in the US. Jazakallah khair. I don't know if Yasir Qadhi feels like this guy is a close friend of his. It seemed like he was a bit on the defensive about it. From what I understand, the reason why the Sheikh was holding, the Imam was holding Yasir Qadhi's feet to the fire a little bit is because he wants him to admit that his position is not really as solid as those who take a side on the matter. Yasir Qadhi is saying it's contradictory, but it's not determinism. And the Imam asking the question wants him to agree that it's determinism. I think that I like the way that the Imam would keep him on point a little bit when Yasir Qadhi was going a bit off track. But I don't think, from what I know, that the intention behind it was to keep the conversation on point or intellectually honest or to get to the bottom of it, because it was more about, let's get Yasir Qadhi to say that he's wrong, or let's get Yasir Qadhi to admit that my position is right, or let's get to the bottom of it, what Yasir Qadhi thinks. That one I would agree with. So yeah, I find that interesting. I guess he could have been a bit better in his approach, but it's so nice to see Yasir Qadhi finally being asked questions and asked questions again when he doesn't quite answer them. I'm happy to see this kind of conversation happen in public, and I don't know, tell me what you thought about my thoughts about it so far. I'll read some comments that I highlighted, and then I will end the stream unless you guys have anything else to say. Reason on Faith says, I really appreciate your approach. You more than steelman an argument and explore it as a believer would before you point out what you have legitimate disagreement with. Well, I appreciate that. And I hope that I did that. I think that comment was earlier on in the stream. I hope that I did do that today. And if I didn't, please do point that out. Hamza and Urano, thank you so much for the super chat. I appreciate it. Says, God can't be just yet create 99. 1 second. God can't be just, yet creates 99% of people to go to hell. If Islam is the truth, we don't have free will. I think that's the position that the Imam was taking on behalf of the atheist asking the question. And I would sort of disagree with that. And PTND was saying, why does he try to talk over Sheikh Yasir Qadhi? Like I said, I think he could have done it better, but I like that he kept him on point sometimes. Yeah. AT-Rex says, it seems like Yasir Qadhi is actually acknowledging that a reasonable person who is not Muslim shouldn't find his argument persuasive. He may have been doing that, and I would like to highlight that if that's the case. Yasir Qadhi is saying, this is paradoxical, and your solution to that as a believer is just stop thinking about it and reaffirm that God is great. Use this as an opportunity to reaffirm God is so awesome that he's able to make paradoxes happen. But I guess as a non-believer, my question is still unsatisfied. How does this make sense? And how are believers, especially the ones at the top who are talking about it or thinking about it, how do they reconcile that with fairness? And how do they think it's okay that this is a non-convincing argument or position that doesn't change anyone's mind if they don't believe in Islam? How are you okay with that? Doesn't it haunt you? Doesn't it keep you up at night? Sheikh Yasir Qadhi and Imam Bakeer, doesn't it make you think a lot of people are screwed, and no matter what I tell them, like we're out here arguing with each other about this, nothing we say is going to convince except our own people among the Muslims. Then what am I going to do to help all those people who are not Muslims? Like, you have to convince them that Islam is the truth and then tell them, but I can't explain this part to you. You just have to believe. You rely on your bank of faith from, I don't know how you would gain that faith, from feeling. I mean, I feel like a lot of faith stems from personal experiences. So very often it's someone goes through something in life, and then hope and faith makes them feel like God is real and Islam must be true, or whatever religion must be true. And then you start borrowing from that bank of faith when you come in contact with questions like these. That is the way into tackling this as a non-believer from what Yasir Qadhi has demonstrated so far. Apollo thinks, thank you so much for the super chat. They say this was great. Do more of these. I'll definitely do another one soon, and I might even be collaborating with Secular Spirit on Monday to dissect another part of this. So let me know what you think. Whiskey Biscuit says, Allah can't create a Lawh al-Mahfuz. Sorry, 1 second. Allah can create a Lawh al-Mahfuz, and Muslims say it's not predetermined. It's clearly stated. It's good wrote. Sorry, I'm not reading that, not understanding that. A tablet with everything. I want to hear you comment on that, please. I'm a little confused about the question. So, Lawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet, supposedly contains the Quran and I believe everything that is ever to happen. It's basically the hard drive where reality is stored. I mean, if you want to think about it that way. I don't really understand the question, but Allah can't create it? Yeah. So they're saying Allah can't create it, and simultaneously Muslims claim that it's not predetermined. Yeah, if reality is all written and the script is all written before it happened, then how is it not predetermined? I mean, that's my position on it too. So I don't know if I have any thoughts to elaborate on that. I think that I've never been able to see it in a different way. And if you zoom out from all this, it's good to remind yourself, if a person can honestly engage with this complex paradox and come to a conclusion that it doesn't make sense, doesn't mean that they deserve to go to hell forever. That's the bigger question when it comes to Islam. I can tackle this like in my personal life. I can think, do I have free will? Is it predetermined? Is there chemical or societal influence on my choices? And I can live with whatever answer I arrive at or don't arrive at. I can live with that uncertainty. What I cannot live with is, while being a believer, while being a Muslim, knowing that it's paradoxical and accepting that a lot of people are going to go to hell and it's predetermined and it's still fair. So that is why I would ask Imam Bakeer more questions about that. And again, thanks for the super chat, Apollo. Thanks. Reminder to everyone, like and share with others, only if it's safe to share, but at least give it a like. That would really help. And Alonzo says, you don't even understand the concept of time. I want to reiterate, say there's a concept of time that makes all of this, that ties all of this together perfectly well. And I'm a human, and most humans, maybe you understand it. Maybe it's not one of those things that are too complex for humans to understand, but I personally don't, and I've been trying to for a long time, to understand how God can be beyond time and not interfere with our actions, but also sometimes interfere. And also we have free will and it's all predetermined. It's not working for me. And the reason it's not making sense to me is not because I'm a bad person who deserves to go to hell. It's a philosophical thought experiment. It's a question. It's not something that can be proven or disproven. You're making an assertion, or a believer is making an assertion that is paradoxical, and also believes that the person who doesn't take the paradoxical or difficult to understand position deserves hell. That is what I find hard to swallow about religion. Hassan Alwan, exactly what I mean. When the consequences are eternal torture, then saying it's a mystery and we can't understand it is not sufficient. That's exactly the point. I'm fine with mysteries existing if the whole religion doesn't hinge on these mysteries. And that's what I think Yasir Qadhi fails to address, and the other sheikh as well, or maybe don't care to address or don't see it the same way. It's not simply enough whether or not you have thoughts on this particular issue. I think it can make or break the entire case of God, of Islam, of Allah. And if only preachers understood that, they don't have to agree with me, but they can understand that a reasonable person might disagree with them and they don't deserve hell for that. That's what I'm saying. Anyway, I hope that all made sense. I hope I didn't misrepresent anything that any of those two sheikhs said, but we'll be back again next week with another one of these clips, and stay tuned. My channel has been in hiatus for a little bit, so please do help me get back on track by interacting with the comments after this video ends, and give it a like and all that kind of stuff. And watch one of these videos next if you would like. Wait, it'll be over here. And as always, think critically and think for yourself.